Hello, everybody, and welcome to Thank You Five, a weekly panel discussion hosted by Straw Dog Theater Company, where we bring theater artists from around the globe into a conversation about live theater in a digital world with a spirit of gratitude and innovation. My name is Hank Boland. I'm here in Chicago. I'm an ensemble member of Straw Dog Theater Company. If you're watching this live on YouTube, you can head over to strawdog.org and our Thank You Five page to join the chat, ask questions, and vote up questions if you want to ask our panelists something. Speaking of panelists, let's meet tonight's guests. We've got Leah Roth Barsanti, Gabriela Furtado. Yes, I'm so sorry, I goofed your name. Sean and Josh. I'm going to have you all do your own introductions now. Leah, why don't you lead the introductions?
Yeah, hi, I'm Leah Roth Barsanti. I am a playwright based out of Chicago. I'm also a theater educator, among other things. I worked in film, I've worked in podcasting and audio. And I'm really excited to dive into tonight's question because I have worked in so many mediums. And I think, the exception proves the rule, kind of, in these cases. So I kind of want to look at the question through that lens and not just what theater is, but what it's not, or increasingly how do we differentiate it from these other mediums?
All right. Gabriela.
Hi, my name is Gabriela Furtado Coutinho. I use she, her pronouns. I currently work as American Theater Magazine's Chicago Associate Editor. I recently graduated from Northwestern in English, creative writing and theater, go Cats. And I've previously worked in new work development and DEI with the Kennedy Center, as well as the Emmys, or also known as the Television Academy. Right now I freelance around the city, also as an actor, playwright, director, dramaturg. And I think I approach the question of what is theater more poetically. So I'll be excited to answer that more in depth when we get to it. I also wanted to acknowledge I'm zooming in from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, my homeland. And I wanted to acknowledge that it's the home for many indigenous peoples, including the Guarani. And I honor with them with honor. And I'm also just so grateful to get to visit my family. My grandmother's paintings are behind me. So I say that with a lot of pride. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you. And Sean.
Yeah, hi. My name is Sean Mallary. I'm a former Straw Dog Ensemble member. I've been a lighting designer for about 20 years. I've done theater, dance, corporate production work, special events. I recently opened Little Mermaid at a dinner theater here in Denver, Colorado. And before that, a large event that was a 1940s themed veterans fundraising event. So I'm kind of all over the map. I too have worked in education out here. I've also dabbled in writing in a lot of different genres. And I started a podcast during the pandemic about moving around as a nomadic military brat. So really happy to be here.
Awesome. We're happy to have you here. It's great to see you. Josh, how about you bring us home?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Sobel, he, him, his. I, too, am a former Straw Dog Ensemble member, former Straw Dog literary manager. I am currently in LA, but I spent about a decade in Chicago, also as artistic director of Haven Chicago. And currently I'm working as a director, producer, dramaturg, educator, and overall content developer across media. And this question of what is theater, yeah, for me, even in thinking about my current venture, Future Home Productions, of which I'm the founding executive producer, I like talking about it as sort of a storytelling company rather than even pinning it down in any one medium. And so I'm really excited to dive in again to sort of what, especially right now, theater and liveness is and how it is influenced by the digital age and how all of it can sort of feed into each other and what that means for new audiences. So yeah, I'm really excited about tonight.
All right. All right. So let's get into this question of what is theater? Gabriela, could you go first?
Absolutely. I got you. And I'm gonna answer this question in like maybe a too abstract way, and I hope that's cool with everyone. But I think I first come into anything in a more poetic space, and I see theater as something as soul work. I see it as somewhere between memory and dream. It incorporates aspects of all of those crazy things. It becomes memory because it is something ephemeral. It is often drawing from memory. It becomes dream because we often create aspirational characters in the things that we create. It becomes dream in that we also just keep striving to innovate our medium. And right now, theater is also dream for me because I'm frankly, concerned with the state that our field is in. I also want to share that I think of theater like with the RE, in that it exists for me separate from space. And not to say that space isn't important, space is important, but that it can be done separately from institutions. It can be done differently from how we might conceptualize it today. And I always want to try to remember that, bring it back to its ancestral roots. What is it for two people to sit in front of each other and tell a story? In terms of theater in the digital age, oh my God. It's a crazy question. I've been talking to my grandfather a lot here while I've been in Brazil, and he actually works at the intersection of computer science and storytelling. He's a professor, so he like researches on that stuff. So I'm always like so worried hearing about his perspective on AI, like so curious, what is the future of our field going to look like? And I think that hopefully it will be something collaborative. I'm really hopeful about the strikes happening right now. I hope that I think we will always return to theater. I just think we will have to allow it to adapt for this new age and really think hard about how we're convincing people that it matters, as well as not being afraid to reform our business models to facilitate the stories that we feel are important and also timely, because we can't, put a new, I'm going to use a really stupid metaphor, like a new plate of food, like a cheeseburger on like an ancient platter. Like if you're going to eat a cheeseburger, like you should have it on like a normal freaking plate. I don't know. It's a really bad metaphor, but like that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. These are wild times we are in, my friends.
We can workshop that cheeseburger metaphor.
Yeah.
That we can spend the next 49 minutes doing that if we need
sacrilegious to my poetic background.
No, that's great.
Professors are squirming.
No, I have to ask though, is your grandfather available for next week?
Oh my gosh.
just checking.
I'm sure you would enjoy it.
That's awesome. Fantastic. Yes, we can unpack the cheeseburger stuff. But that is great. That's great. That's great. Let's see, where are we going? Sean, what do you got? What is theater?
No, I followed a couple of the last episodes just to kind of see what you all were talking about. And the notion of storytelling and the evolution of telling stories around a campfire. I guess I think about theater still in that way, and obviously there's a lot of evolution left to go and a lot of room to keep developing. But I still keep thinking about theater, whether it's live or digital, about this audience connection. And I do feel that having that live, whatever that means these days, is sort of important to the idea of theater. Again, forming those connections with a live audience, and but basically kind of breaking it down to sort of an old, technical idea of you've got your purposes to inform and entertain. And I think on top of that is creating a vessel that helps develop empathy between people. And I think that's a strong thing that I've always thought about, but mostly just sharing experiences, some that maybe that we are not familiar with from our own lives. And I think that's sort of a keystone for whatever theater is going to be. I think those are all cornerstones.
All right, great. Josh.
I sort of echo Sean that like the thing for me that unifies all of it is liveness. And I think it's really interesting, especially in a digital age, to interrogate what liveness can mean. How can a live experience be shared across digital space, given the reach of digital space in terms of, people across the world can have a shared experience at the same time, is that even if it's broadcast, is there an aspect of liveness there? And so I'm curious about sort of jumping right to the digital age thing, but it speaks to my answer to that question of what is theater. I think that it is the live experience. And I know that feels very broad, but I got to be honest, that's very accurate to my view on it. I mean, I've probably bored Hank enough with like ranting about how, for me, pro wrestling is theater, right? Mm-hmm. Like I saw, The Who in concert doing Quadrophenia. I would argue that was theater. Like there's so much in terms of, I think, where we sometimes narrowly define it, but the thing that I love about it, and the thing that I think speaks also, Gabriela, to your point of like not only thinking about it institutionally, is that the live experience, the happening, the ritual, the immersive, whatever it is, there's theater in all of that. And it's particularly interesting just here in Los Angeles, for what it's worth, that like the theater world and the immersive world as like an aspect of liveness that's actually been doing pretty well. Mm-hmm. Is at least here in the pandemic moment, they don't talk to each other. There's not a lot of communication, or not as much as I would like to see, between those worlds. And so I think it begs that question of like, how are we defining theater outside of just liveness? And for me, it is all of it. It's inclusive. There's sort of an umbrella under this idea of liveness, and we can talk about all of it from the perspective of theater.
Wow. All right. Leah, what do you got?
Yeah. No, this is fascinating. And I agree with most of what's been said. I was thinking the whole time you were talking, Josh, about the fact that I just planned and executed my wedding, and that was theater, and it felt like theater. And the only difference between my day of coordinator and a stage manager was the amount they equally get paid, right? So, but essentially they're doing the same thing. So I thought that was fascinating. I also, in a minute, want to touch on this whole concept of IR, because I do think we are one of the few industries where that conversation doesn't feel as much like it's going to immediately drive us out of business, at least. And I think part of that is because of who gets into theater, because if you're truly trying to be part of the capitalist machine, you left a long time ago. But also I think that it is that aspect of liveness that you all are talking about. But from my perspective, something I just wanted to throw in and add to that conversation is, I think in a lot of ways, the difference between theater and some of these other mediums that we're experiencing in, 2023, is that theater kind of comes from the word in a really pure way. I love that Gabriela compared it to poetry, because I think they are actually more similar than theater and television or theater and film. I think theater is more of a poetical medium, and I don't think poetical's the correct word to use there, but I'm a writer, so I don't have to, be careful with the words or anything. But I think theater does have its roots in poetry in a way that some of these other mediums don't. And, as a lot of people have said, starting with those stories around a campfire, people didn't have visuals to show. People didn't have anything other than their bodies and their words. So that's why I think theater is so based in the word in that way.
I really want to respond to so many of these things. Is that cool with y'all? Oh my God, my mind is just like bubbling. Something I've been thinking about a lot, and I love what you said, Leah, is that theater has its roots somewhere else. I've been thinking a lot, being home, about my culture, and it's not really a typical thing here so much to pursue theater. We do have a thriving theater ecology, but people don't. It takes a long time for you to make a living in the way that like much worse than the U.S. And we can talk about our U.S. crisis in a sec. But I keep coming back to it. Like for instance, in my culture, Carnaval, we're very known for that. It's a very theatrical culture. We talk with our hands. We are loud. We laugh. Our language is laughter. It's a very beautiful thing. And we communicate by sharing stories. We're very personal with one another. We make physical contact with one another. For me, that is also all that is theater. And I used to think that TV and film were just spin-offs of theater, but last summer I was working in Los Angeles. I'm going to talk like okay. Los Angeles. It's a U.S. place. Okay. Sorry, I was going to say Los Angeles. Bueno. I was working there, and I went to the Academy Museum with a bunch of other folks who were in the program I was in. And I realized, no, TV and film have their roots in technology and what is possible in that medium. You know, you look at how silent films were done, I love silent films. I think it's so creative. And I think sometimes when you put a limit on something, you can also develop a new genre. And that happens a lot within theater. But to a certain degree, there's so much innovation that was done within these technology barriers. And I feel like with theater, we kind of set our own limitations, we set our own genres, and our roots are in the communication, the storytelling. And yes, the liveness. And I've been struggling so much with that question of liveness, especially because I have a brother who has a very severe disability. I'm very into disability justice. And the pandemic was the first time that a lot of theaters realized, oh, we can actually stream, and it doesn't hurt that much for us to do it. So while I feel so strongly about the liveness, I also know that so many people can get that element. I also know that the only reason my brother benefited a lot from the recorded productions is because the theater is not open to him in a lot of cases. There are very few productions that are done in such a sensory-friendly way wherein he can attend because he is so severe. He often needs more than one-on-one care. And I'm just always wondering how we can keep adapting and not just think about, okay, theater, we're sitting here, they're sitting there. We don't interrupt. It's a darkened space. That's not where we started off doing theater. You know, we're also talking about rituals. So very curious about all those questions and conflicted. Also, I reworked the cheeseburger metaphor. I will have you know. It's going to be better now. How do you guys eat plantains? Okay, maybe you guys don't eat plantains, but how I eat a plantain is with my hands, right? I eat plantains with my hands. I wouldn't put it on something else. I wouldn't pick it up with a bunch of money. I wouldn't pick it up with something more concrete or something that took time to make, because my hands are going to get messy, and theater is messy, and theater is personal, and it touches bodies and it touches souls. And I know that's still really stupid to stick with the food metaphor, but I don't know why it's calling to me right now. So many things.
Oh, Hank, I don't know if I can hear
I think
you.
you're muted.
Anyone else want to jump on that?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, Leah, you go.
All you.
Well, sort of, you know, it's off of that, and also a question that I just noticed in our little panel here, which is, you know, is an experience theater? And I think, like, in my opinion, yes, I don't think that's all that makes it theater. I think there's a coalescing of elements, but I think there is something innately theatrical about the live experience. And I think in a way, like, you know, thinking about the audience experience alone, and, you know, as, you know, Gabriela, you were just talking about, like, thinking about audiences and different demographics of audience, different, you know, neurotypicalities and different things. To think about it as an experience is actually critical to me. To think about the nature of the space as a space where an experience is happening, that people are moving through or are a part of. I mean, you were talking, someone mentioned earlier about, like, something that is innate to theater being about that connection between what's happening live and the audience, because it's all happening live at the same time, right? And so I think, to me, that's why I would answer that question with yes, and how I connected to, Gabriela, what you were saying, because it's a space where the experience of the audience, the experience that is happening in space shared together as a community, must be considered on a number of levels, and often isn't considered enough, in my opinion. It's not thought about enough in that way. So yeah.
I agree with that. But I also think where a lot of theaters went wrong during the pandemic was trying to create experiences for a stage and then putting them in a different medium. Right. So I do think any experience can be what it is, right? Any experience can be experiential, which is that was I couldn't think of a better word. I did a weird thing there. It's fine. But I think it needs to be designed for the medium it's going into. And especially, I mean, Gabriela, you're talking about neurodiverse audiences or people who can't necessarily make it to the theater. I think we can design experiences for them that are fully designed to be viewed at home and don't feel like something's lost in that, right? What I was doing during the pandemic was I made a an immersive radio play, which again, I've been talking about how these things are separate, you know, audio, video, and theater, but I also do think there's a lot of overlap. So I tried to create essentially an immersive experience that could be viewed or experienced at, I'm saying experience so many times, experience at home. So I just think, I think something needs to be made for what it's made for. And if it is translated, and you see that both ways, right? You see it when we try to translate film to theater. You also see it when you try to translate theater to film or film to audio or books to audio. Something feels lost, right? So yeah, that's all I had to say.
Yes.
I was gonna. Oh, sorry.
Go for it, Sean.
No, I was just gonna say, you know, after the pandemic, Meow Wolf opened here, and I don't know if you are all familiar with Meow Wolf, but it is this phenomenon that's sort of springing up across the country, and it is half theater, half art install, half sort of sci-fi, and experience is the only way I can really describe it, right? I mean, there's a storyline, kind of, there's characters, but I mean, it's all about all the senses. And I think they are trying to cater to people with either sensory issues or sensory needs. I think, you know, they've tried to build that into that experience. But then again, the people that fill that space and that experience also add another layer to it. So it's just another interesting thing. It's like it's adding a whole other dimension, but it's very much a commodity, as somebody else has noted here in the comments. I mean, it is a thing you buy into, and you go and you spend your time, and you buy the things in the gift store and the food court, and that's your experience, you know. And I'm curious about, you know, if people have attended things like that, and, you know, what's your take on it, and how does it sort of fit into this notion of experience? Because I don't know, if I haven't seen yet that it translates into a digital space. And I like what Leah was saying about you need to build the thing for the medium you're trying to transmit it on. And I didn't really go anywhere, but.
And there's like no, and then that way too, you're not putting the mediums at war with one another. There's no like, oh, this is the most pure, like, I think that there is so much excitement and merit in all of the mediums. It's just about how we're fitting it. And I love the idea of experience as opposed to anything else. And I like popped it into the chat. I get a little worried because like, I think we move away in today's world from the experience question, and we move more towards seeing theater as a commodity. How are we marketing it? How are we selling it? How many people are buying it? And that's really important because we need butts and seats. We need to be practical and be able to afford the theater that we create. I just also wonder to what degree it gets us a little behind in innovation, a little behind in, you know, the expansive level of expansiveness and creativity that we can make. And that's also why I love new work development. I love grants. I love workshops in which things are done with a very low budget. I could go on about that, but yeah, I think that those are also great training grounds for experiments in experience and really figuring out, what are we doing here? What could we do here?
Well, may I jump in on that? Yeah, so a couple of things like between Sean and actually all of you that just like are sort of pulling together for me is like, when we talk about theater in the digital age, and also the referenced a few times now crisis that we are certainly in, the, you know, between the Theater Mania article and now the New York Times article today, like everyone's starting to actually talk about it, that like institutions are crumbling, like they are crumbling all around us. And so it's not only, for me, it's not only a question of how are we adapting to the digital age in terms of the media itself, but how are we allowing liveness to be informed by the digital age? And that's a different question for me. And I feel like it's one of my greatest frustrations with sort of the American theater right now. And when we talk about like, you talk about Meow Wolf, right? You talk about before the pandemic, honestly, the pandemic exacerbated problems, in my opinion, that were already there. Like it made things go faster, but this was the road, you know what I mean? And so it was always interesting to me that as theater, as the cracks were starting to show, Hebrew Brantley's, immersive thing down in Pilsen was like extending like crazy and selling out, and extended for a full year and unexpectedly. Right before everything locked down, there was an article that came out that at that moment, for the first time in I forget how many decades, creative live performances from like Coachella concerts, but like artistic things were outselling sporting events at large arenas in the United States. That was sort of huge, right? And so my question about how theater adapts to the digital age is, are we actually asking what are the live experiences that audiences are placing value in today? What are the live experiences that audiences are spending money on? And a lot of them are experiences. They are concerts, they are Meow Wolf, they are San Diego Comic-Con, which has built-in theater. It's secret cinema doing immersive Stranger Things stuff. And what's crazy to me is I feel like the American theater is sleeping on it because, Netflix, WGA stuff notwithstanding, standing with unions, but like, it was interesting when the Duffer Brothers got their overall, those who don't know Duffer Brothers, I'm referring to Stranger Things. They gave money for the Duffers to develop a live action play, not a musical, a play set as a prequel in the Stranger Things universe. And it's being done in London. It's being done like right now with Sonia Friedman, major West End producer. And I'm like, why were we not on that? Because that's something we know. I mean, look at Halloween Horror Nights here in LA. The audiences are going. And so do we really not think that audience would show up to something like this? Why are we not taking Netflix's money and creating something like that is informed by the digital age, informed by contemporary audience tastes and whatnot, and building out experiences from that point of view? Otherwise, it feels like we're just expecting new audiences to like what was cool 30 years ago. And it doesn't work. It's like, take your theater medicine. It's good for you. I don't want that.
Yeah. Oh gosh, if you write family dramas, I love watching a good family drama. I cannot write them. I can't do it because, and I still see good ones coming out, but I read, Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams. I'm like, well, it's done. I feel like it's done, but gosh, so much that you said was so good, Josh. I mean, I think part of it is we're snobby, right? Like, we read Shakespeare, so we feel like we have to use it. We read all these great American dramas, so we feel like we have to mirror them, because otherwise maybe our theater education should have been spent like living life and having experiences, and maybe that would have been better, but we paid all this money to go to college and go to grad school. I'm might be in the middle of an existential crisis right now, but but all everything you said was true. But also there is a sadness in me when I feel like, and I know Stranger Things was just your example, and I know there are things like Meow Wolf, which is one of my favorite experiences. Everyone should go if they get a chance. It's so cool. You're Sean, where are you now?
I'm in Denver.
You're in Denver. Okay.
Yeah.
Denver one just opened. I think Vegas has one too. I went to the one in Santa Fe.
Right.
I don't know if they're different, but now I feel like I need to go, and it's really cool because you're just uncovering the story kind of at your own pace. It's this big immersive alien day glow creative. It's just so cool. But and that did not come from anything. But I think a lot of these immersive experiences almost feel like sequels or prequels, or the things that are getting, you know, the buzz are either A, Instagrammable, or B, built off something that someone already knows, right? And I do feel a pang of sadness in that, because I do think theater is something to me that could break new and exciting things. And I think it still can, right? I'm not saying that, but I do think increasingly people feel like they have to choose between money or growing new artists.
Well, may I just, I don't want to take up too much space, but I do want to do a direct reply, if that's okay, because like,
yeah,
I agree in terms of like there's the IP game that I hear in what you're talking about, right? As well, you know, there's like, oh, Stranger Things, and like, is that sort of building off an IP? And some of it I'm okay with. Like, honestly, I had the opportunity to go to London late last year and see Totoro, which was incredible, because it was like 25 classically trained Japanese puppeteers, Jim Henson puppets, and the Royal Shakespeare Company. Jesus, right? Like, I mean, it's not even just Broadway. There's a level of artistry brought to the commercial endeavor that is really, really, and to that IP that is really, really interesting. But it's like, I've been thinking lately, and I actually just reached out to Chris Matthews, you know, house theater back in the day, may they rest in peace, did the Hammer Trinity. And I'm like, was that a decade ahead of its time? I've been asking that question a lot lately, in terms of like, in the era of Vox Machina, in the era of, you know, the Dungeons and Dragons movie, in the era of House of the Dragon and the Amazon, like, is original content and nurturing original content and original creative content that still is informed by the sort of moment and what audiences are spending money on experientially. Is there still room? And I just feel like that's, again, where the American theater is, institutionally speaking, not feeding and watering it, but then complaining that those audience spaces aren't showing up as it all crumbles around us.
Yeah.
Now, I think if I can just jump in here, I think one of the things that I'm sort of hearing is this idea of the art form needs to be experienced, but it's the institutions that need the butts in the seats, right? If you own seats and a space, you got to fill them. But if you just got a great idea and need a warehouse, go for it, right? That's what that you're, and you know, you're right to that point, Josh. Like, people want to have those experiences, right? And to Leah's point, they want to Instagram them, right? Why not?
They do,
right? Like, that's awesome.
They
Look
do.
what I did. I had it. Like, what they're all they're doing is like, I had an experience and I need to share it with people, right? Like, that's awesome. But yeah, I don't know. I feel it goes back to Gabriela's idea of like the art versus the institution stuff, and which idea, which version of theater are we talking about or worried about, and which you know, when you say the American theater, is that an art form or an institution?
Yeah, I was really curious about that. Like, who would you consider? Sean?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just said both. Sorry.
Both.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just really interested in that question, because it's like, truly, who are we thinking about? Are we thinking about funders? Are we thinking about our local legislatures? I'm using a lot of thoughts in my minds are coming from a conference I attended last week called Thrive, Uplifting Theaters of Color. It was hosted by the Theater Communications Group, and there were a lot of folks who came in to talk. A lot of people who, you know, are in a position to be able to give people money, and a lot of theaters who don't have a permanent physical home, a lot of theaters of color who have had to really advocate for themselves and give institutions like the cold hard data. And it's interesting in the way that we've parceled everything out in terms of work, which, like, I understand, you know, we all have our different roles in society, but there isn't like a centralized power that we can go to and just be like, hi, please fix this. We're all kind of scrambling in our own lonely corners of the US. And I just wonder, what kind of forum could we build to be able to talk to one another? How can we find, like, what are the things that working, and like where can we share that? So I'm just looking for more spaces like that. Who are the big people of the American theater?
It's interesting, Gabriela, because now I'm wondering if, like, I felt like theater was bad during the pandemic, not because it was on Zoom, but because we as artists had never been in a room together. Because so much of what you're talking about is about collaboration and collaborative energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if it was like, not that we weren't in a room when something was being performed, I think that was part of it, but also that we had never been in a room together at all.
Yeah. And I think, like, also in the digital age, we are going at a much faster pace than our bodies ever intended us to go in. Like, American culture is notorious for that. Even before the pandemic, there are countries in Latin America that called American theater McDonald's theater or fast food theater, because we just do everything so fast. We move on from project to project to project. We don't stop. And I've always thought, like, of all the places, like, it shouldn't theater be the place to slow down? And I don't know if maybe the pandemic, helps us also get some more convenient tools in terms of communication. Instead of like going out to see someone, you can like take a Zoom, which I love, by the way. It's incredibly accessible. It's the reason why I'm able to work here right now instead of in Chicago, where I usually am. But I don't know. I think it does impact our interactions. It does impact how we occupy space. I remember before the pandemic, there were so many great local businesses in the Evanston area. Of course, so many of them shut down because of the pandemic. But even now that some places have opened back up and new businesses are opening, I go out at night and like no one's going out. Like it'll be like 8 p.m. Oh, imagínate, 8 p.m. and no one's on the street except for me. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I don't know if that's a cultural thing. I don't know if that's a pandemic thing. But I'm also just thinking about, okay, like, what are the American things? And then what are the like overall global things that are going on? Because also, the US hasn't always had that culture of, oh, we have free time today, we go to the theater. I feel like a lot of countries have seen that as the gathering place. And coming to the US, my first thought when I was little and I moved there was, oh, theater in the US, Broadway. Here, theater will be a lot about our stories, even because the things that we consume on movies, like US very much dominates what we watch on our screens. And so when we go to see something in person, it really is very specific to our experience. So I'm just thinking about that. I'm thinking about how the UK funds theater. And I know that they've also had some challenges recently, but still there is a sense that we go and we talk to the people sitting next to us. And that's something that's like, you can't change that overnight. That's something that comes from everyone. But then how do we reframe narratives and how do we talk about theater to really bring everyone in and see, like, why aren't people going? Why don't people feel welcome? And I loved what Josh was saying too about like the liveness aspect. How are we using that? Because that is such an incredible thing and it is something unique to us. And we really have to think about like, how can we truly invite and embrace all the people?
That makes me think of years ago at Straudog, we did a stage production of Master and Margarita. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with that. It's a Russian novel that was translated. And we had a Russian audience just come out of the woodwork for that show. We were like, where did all these Russians come from? And the fact that we were telling a story from their community, from their culture that was important to them, and they came out, and it was very important for them, and it was a gathering and an experience for them, and they responded in such a different way than some of our other audiences, and I think American theater has been trying to shift towards serving their communities better and things like that, but have not done that great of a job in general. And I think it's gotten better. But I know a couple of weeks ago, you guys were just talking about accessibility to theater and that being such a major problem, and getting people in our spaces, and how the shift onto, digital access has sort of changed the game in so many ways. But yeah, I mean, how do we make our theaters that sort of community gathering spaces again, whether it's in person or live, but just made me think about that,
Well, it's funny thinking about Master and Margarita in that, and the fact that you're, drawing a spotlight to a very specific community sort of like investment, right? Like a really specific demographic. And I think that's something that I'm learning more and more, whether it's from the storefront level to the large institution level. I hate to say it, but people aren't thinking granularly like that. I think there is, my own experience in Chicago, I don't want to speak right now. I've been out, for 4 or 5 years now, but like when I was there, it always did feel, and I do feel this here in LA at times too, that there is this idea of like the theater audience, right? Like the people who go and see theater rather than who reads the Tribune, right? And it was funny, when I was at Haven, one of the things that we said was, one, we would never worry about that. And two, it was about figuring out like audiences for specific things because I would program shit that other artistic directors in town would stand in the lobby of the Den and be like, are you sure there's an audience for that? I'm like, and it was weird. And I remember particularly doing Isaac Gomez's The Displaced, which is like a full-on horror play, right? Like we levitated Karen Rodriguez in the Den. It was awesome. And we didn't chase, like we didn't think about marketing from the sort of usual community strategies. We were like, let's go to the horror fans, like let's go to the genre fans, let's go to the nerds, let's go to the message boards. When we did, Total Bent, we went a lot to church communities, particularly BIPOC-led church communities. We went to like in Master and Margarita, it makes sense, like go to the Russian community, go to like the cultural specificity of the piece. And that's a lot of them don't even know that we make shit that they would like. When we did How We Got On at Haven as well, we were like packing it with like young students and like young Chicago authors, brought in a whole bunch of like young poets and shit that like didn't think that like theater was this. And so just by being specific with that outreach in the community specific way that I hear you talking about, Sean, like that changes the game altogether. And it's shocking to me how at times people will hire marketing professionals based on, do you know tessitura, rather than how are you thinking outside the box for community outreach. And it's depressing to me.
Do you know your literal neighbors? Might be a more apt question, right?
Yeah.
And
Sesame Street, man.
Well, it just shows, this whole conversation just shows. Can I curse? Am I allowed to curse on here? Yeah.
We didn't talk about this pre-show. But as a general rule, right? Like the show, it's not a blue show.
Okay.
We don't want to, it's not like that. It should be used it could be used as a tool in a classroom. So okay. Would you curse in someone else's classroom?
It depends on who's class.
I'm the wrong person to ask that question.
Yeah, so am I, right? So Leah, yes, you can curse. Go for it. As a matter of fact, like just we can bleep this out. Just go for it.
Fine. I'm cursing in my own classroom. I was just gonna say, it shows that the idea is that stakeholders are bullshit, and we see time and time again the stakeholders passing up on things that do turn out to be big hits, right? And I wonder if theater is kind of a socialist movement, and the answer to the question of what is American theater is like, what happens when we're trying to make this socialist artistic movement work in a capitalist world, right? So I think that's really interesting. And Josh, I don't know if you were at Haven when you all did Rocky Horror.
That was right after me. That was literally one of that was right after me.
I have never seen a more truly like diverse from all walks of life theater audience, because you have the people who came for the drag show, you have the people who are coming for Rocky Horror because they love and know Rocky Horror, and then there were also all sorts of, it was almost like you went into the lobby between shows and there were people selling like harnesses and like all sorts of stuff, and it was cool, and there was an Instagram moment in it as well. So I mean, it really hit on a lot of these things we've been talking about. So
By design, yeah, it's all
by
by design.
exactly, right. So that was just a long way to say kudos on your theater company getting it. It was cool. It was really cool, Sean.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Like Haven, we've been asking that question a lot, and it's why we're now, it's funny. I just got to hang out with Ian and Angela and everyone here in LA at the Michaud Film Festival, which is a very young but awesome. Jesus, these folks, it's only 5 years old, but they've got their heads on straight in a lot of different ways. And it was cool because even there, like, for one thing, having Haven then represented there as a film, place that we can go as well. Again, like, how are we cross-pollinating? How are we starting conversations? And the reason I bring that up as well is, like, one of the coolest parts of Michaud is they had a theatrical aspect to their film festival. Their theme was outliers, but their sort of aesthetic framework was travel, was like an airport. So the like volunteers and ushers who were working for the festival had full on like tarmac vests, but in the color and logos of the Michaud Film Festival. They had the orange batons to like direct people to different, they renamed instead of like, oh, this shorts block is happening in auditorium 3, it was go to gate 3. And it was cheesy, but in a good way. And it was understanding that like, oh, everyone who walked through that door, even as at a film festival, was having a communal experience and a shared live experience. And so now, Haven just launched a film festival. And one of the questions I asked while we were like walking to our seats was like, how do we do that? Like, how do we let the Haven Film Festival like have a clear container, an identity, like a themed framework that the audience, as soon as you walk in the door, there's an event happening. And so, like, again, like the Rocky Horror thing, like I'm so proud of what Ian and Angela are doing, because that was what I was trying to build, and they've just taken the ball and run with it and blown it open. And yeah, I think that's what it needs to be. It is reinventing the institution in a lot of ways too, because you're talking about institution as a communal space, and like that's one way of, rather than like a place to go see a show, it's like it's a gathering place. Sorry, I'll shut up, but like, yeah.
Wow, a pause. I think there's we started now, we move from liveness to experience, and now we're using event. So like, but right, Josh, like, I don't think it's like this or that, right? Like, I think
it's a personal term. I just don't want to like impose that on the room.
No, but I'm not saying you, I'm like collectively, right? Like, I think like when we talk about how we rethink this and how we reimagine this, right? How are those things different, right? Like can an American institution create event after event, right? Or experience after experience? Or does it become so institutionalized that it's like, well, that's the same as the last experience or event I got there? And does it matter? Because there are people that go to a football game twice a week.
I guess my response to that is, it feels, I mean, I've worked in the event world most of my career, and most of it feels just like a money grab, right? Even the Meow Wolf thing, I mean, it is cool, but it is, it's a $50 ticket or whatever. But I don't know. I think it starts getting blurry because a institution will recognize, oh, this event is successful, we can just recreate that. And I think about all of those sort of pop-up event sort of things that keep showing up and not paying actors, not paying rent, and so I think it gets into a weird territory where it's back to that whole commodity idea, and so I worry that could be an issue. And just real quick note about like the Instagram idea. So many events that I do, we are tailoring it to a selfie experience. And I think it really starts to lose that liveness, that quality that we've been talking about. So the whole event thing, it just, having been around it so much, just makes me nervous in terms of the system of it all, you know.
That's so hard. Yeah, something I've been thinking a lot about. I got to hear Seema Sueko, Daniel Park, and Marie Monique Marthal talk about a solidarity economy. And it's still so hard because we don't operate within a solidarity economy. We operate in an extractive economy. But just to hear a bit about the bite-sized tools that you could try to incorporate and infuse, and eventually, you know, try to have, instead of a like unilateral structure, a more shared model in which we're all stakeholders. And that doesn't necessarily help with like the selfie thing. Well, I think it would potentially, but it's just like, it's just still a concern at the back of my mind, because there will always be people outside who will be the people with the money, will be able to finance, who will want the selfie thing. But just to explain a little bit more about solidarity economy, it offers these really great tangible tools to figure out how we can look to each other as and offering resources in a like very caring way. So for instance, instead of just money being a currency in solidarity economy, time is also a currency. Food is a currency. So it's kind of like a take what you need, leave what you can system. Time banking is a big thing about it. I can drop a link into the chat if you're curious about time banking. Just a lot of really great things that we can think about. But still, we are in this capitalist society, and people will want to walk away with a cute image. And so I don't know, I don't have the answers, but that was something that gave me a lot of hope. I'll drop more about it into the chat.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. I feel like for a lot of institutions, and again, this is particularly in, I think, the Chicago ecology of it, could really benefit from that sort of shared effort and that community, as opposed to many other things. But I want to hear more about that, and I want to oh man, I'm trying to think about how to put this back into where you started, Gabriela, which is the idea of memory and dream, right? If we go back like an hour ago when we were talking about memory and dream, and now we're all talking about like selfie moments. So, right, like that line, like where like do the people who want the selfie moment understand they're part of a dream and a memory, or aren't they? Or do we need to build them dreams and memories?
Does one have to understand? Does one have to understand in order to have an experience? Does one have to, like, what does understand mean?
I feel like one has to slow down at that point, right? Because you can't even understand if you're not listening, and to truly deeply listen, you can't be, you know, pa, and be kind of working all the time, because also, you know, and I have a lot of empathy for the people who are in the selfie moment thing, because, and I'm not very familiar with that world, but from what I understand, the influencer culture, you're constantly 24/7 on the clock, and you're constantly figuring out how you can extract things from your own life into a commodity. And I think that's really hard on people. And how can we get people to wait, let me just live for myself, put it all down. What am I doing? What am I hearing? What is this all about? I don't know if it's about understanding so much as slowing down.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, slowing down and being in the dream, as opposed to trying to chronicle the dream or capture the dream. To understand that, oh man, I'm in a dream and I'm in a dream live with that person and that stranger and this person making the dream and like that, as opposed to, right, like this.
Well,
Yes.
and I would argue like I almost put like the distancing there like in line with like understanding, right? Like I'm trying to capture this thing rather than just being in the experience of it. And I think that's where like trying to capture something so I can hold it in my hand and like look at it rather than just being sort of radically present, in the most poetic sense of that. And I think that's something that not only American culture really struggles with, rather, but American audience expectations. We've not had that be part of our culture. I still remember a good friend of Straw Dog, who I'm still very close with, Madison Dempsey. I'm going to name drop there, shout out. Madison had done a series of Beckett one acts for her Columbia College Chicago like BFA directing final. And like kudos to Madison. I'm gonna swear, she fucking went for it. Like she did not shy away from like, maybe it's not gonna make sense. Maybe you're not going to understand it. Maybe you're not going to like, that's not sort of the point of it. And she like Footfalls, great little Beckett play where it's someone moving so freaking slowly from one end of the stage to the other while a very Beckett text is happening. And then they turn and they go back the other way really slowly. And I remember someone was asked, I was in earshot of someone asking like, well, did you enjoy the play? And someone was like, how can I enjoy something if I didn't understand it? And I've thought about that a lot over the years, because I think, Gabriela, it speaks to something that you're talking to, Hank, as well, but like this notion of like slowing down, right? And not coming in with the expectation of understanding something, but rather just moving through it, being affected by it, listening, as you said as well, like listening closely to it and just seeing how it feels for the sake of that alone. And that's not what we've been trained to do in this country. That's not what we've trained to think of theater as in this country. And I think that's one of the ways we can radically change that in the work we make, is like, how can we feed and water that notion of slowing down? How can we choose work that in some way demands that, even while being in conversation with media, even while being in conversation or influenced by, I don't think any of these things are actually mutually exclusive, but I love this idea that's been introduced of like, screw understanding, it's about slowing down and listening, that's yes.
I think it's what I would call dramaturgies of affect. Yeah, Leah.
I was just gonna say, I think it goes back to the idea of like creating community. And I don't know if I'm as anti like selfie experiences as some other people in the room. Like, I'm a selfie girl, I'm not gonna lie. And I think sometimes part of creating community is being able to relive that community. I do think in a world where we're often not present, our job as theater artists is to create a space where that community can be experienced. And I've seen it happen, right? I've seen it happen. I recently put up a play as part of Rhino Fest where we sold Malort shots at the beginning. And because people had just had a shot of Malort, it was much thing, right? Like, it's like, oh, like, get them drunk. But it did create a space where everyone had just had a terrible experience, and then they can talk about it before the play even starts. And we also made more money off Malort shots than tickets, but that was a whole other thing. All that being said, what I'm saying is I think our job as theater artists is to create a space where that community can happen. And like, to quote one of my favorite movies of all time, if you build it, they will come, because people are seeking community, right? Like, they are wanting that in today's society, because in this fast-paced world that you're all describing, like, it doesn't exist as much. That's why board games are having a renaissance, right? I was thinking about board games a lot while you all were talking, because that's a thing you can do in a room together with people face to face, where you are just in the moment and you're building community and you are just in fellowship with people. So how can we create theatrical experiences that do that and don't make you feel like you have to sit down and watch a thing and then go discuss it over like a fancy martini or something. And that's your
this is what pisses me off so much in a way about, you know, the nature of the conversations that's happening, or rather like the fact that we are now finally having the conversation about, you know, the theater industry is crumbling institutionally, you know, because like, you know, there's so much rhetoric, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but like, oh, the pandemic's been so hard, right? Like, oh, theater audiences aren't bouncing back, you know, people aren't coming back. And I'm like, no, people are going to live things. They're just not going to theater. And I think that's often not actually the conversation that institutional theater is having. Like the fact that people actually, to your point, Leah, what you just said, like people do what, it's clear, the numbers are actually showing that people want to go and do things. People are going to live things. So if theater isn't drawing and producing the same stuff and treating it in this commodity and product oriented way, rather than in a community nurturing, gathering space sort of way, and we wonder why it's not working. It's just sort of maddening to me. It's like we're literally just like, it's staring us, and it should be, I don't know, maybe this is disrespectful, I apologize, but it feels like it should be obvious. It feels like it really should be obvious right now in a moment where, are we denying then as a larger industry that audiences are bouncing back in other live experiences? Are we just conveniently ignoring that so we can still keep doing what we're doing and feel like, oh, it's the pandemic, it's audiences? No, like maybe we need to pivot. Maybe to survive, we need to pivot. Anyway, sorry, I get heated about it.
Well, this makes me think back to something else Leah said about, like, you know, what we do rooted in word and text and poetry. I mean, can that notion, you know, survive with how we're looking at theater today? I mean, if we want the poetry to be the focus of what we're doing, what are the best ways to do that in an audience that wants to take part and include themselves and be vocal? Are we chasing sort of a dead dog with the language being so rooted in what we do? You know, I'm just curious as a playwright, you know, like, how are you thinking about that as you write new plays, as you know, you're steering away from family dramas, but what does that mean in terms of how you're translating your poetry to an audience these days? So I don't know, I'm just curious, because like the event model to me doesn't feel rooted in word and poetry. It feels more about, you know, the presence of what is happening right now and the Malort shot or whatever, you know. So I don't know, it's interesting to me.
I mean, I think it can be, but I know we're running low on time.
Yeah.
But I think it can be. I really do. I think it can be both. And I think, like, who hasn't wanted to attend a party where people talk like they're in a play and say what's on their mind and like do all the things that characters in plays do? Like, that's what I strive to create. And I don't know that I'm there yet, but that's what I want.
Party.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Theater is party.
A party where everyone acts like they're in a play. I don't know. That's my goal.
Well,
Someone
and
ship
like,
it.
well, and like I put this in the chat, like I submit for consideration a play called X by Alistair McDowell. It is one of the most incredible pieces of horror theater, psychological horror theater that I have ever seen. And it is absolutely a work of poetry. Like the way the text exists, functions dramaturgically and otherwise on the page. And I feel like that could be done as an immersive play. That could be done experientially, and actually I think would make it that much scarier given the sort of quote unquote twist at the end. Like I think that the idea of putting people inside the brain in that way, in a physicalized way, could be really, really interesting. And so yeah, I second what Leah's saying. Like I think it can be, but it's about building it with that intentionality. It's about really, and I think that's the thing. I think institutional theater is sort of still, again, looking 30 years back rather than interrogating how to do this stuff, how to actually achieve, Leah, what you're talking about, like how to bring these worlds in synergy together rather than opposition. Yeah.
That's also what I love about Chicago, is like the neighborhood theater the neighborhood theater is just like the willingness to take risks, the moving away from risk, risk averseness. Oh my gosh, English. But I just really want to uplift like all of the storefronts. Like, go check out your local neighborhood theater, check out your local neighborhood theaters of color. I mean, there's just always incredible work being done there, and in just a moment you can find that you will transcend, and it can just be a moment of hope for our industry, but it's something, and I think it's big.
Wow, I can't think of anything better than to just end on like a moment of hope.
Sure.
Plus I have a feeling I'm going to get called out for letting the show go long. But oh my God, oh man, like I feel like we can end the show, but we can all hang out after and keep recording. I don't know, whatever. But man, you four are not done talking to each other. I can definitely sense that. But I gotta put an end on things here. So Kyle, I'll go through that if you're ready. Okay. So awesome. Just thank you all, everybody. It's thank you 5. So I got 5 thank yous. Thank you 1 to our amazing panelists for their time and their thoughts and their insights. This was amazing. Thank you. Thank you number 2 to Kyle Hammond for creating and producing the show. Thank you number 3 to officehours.global, Edwin Ruiz and Mondo Machine for helping make it all possible. Thank you number 4. This show is made possible by Straw Dog Theater Ensemble members, and Straw Dog Theater is run on a free theater model where our productions are available to anyone and everyone free of charge. We can only do this with generous donations from our community. So you can find out more information about donating or becoming a Straw Dog sustaining subscriber to continuously support our work at strawdog.org. And thank you number 5 to the folks who are viewing and participating and in the chat and supporting the show. We'll see you all next week in conversation with Tara Anderson, Jennifer Bielstein, Jessica Hutchinson, and Beck Swan Lambrecht. So until next week, I'm Hank Boland, and I thank you.